I'm Ika Ferrer-Gotic, and we are speaking to Ed Vulliamy, The Guardian's Ed Vulliamy. Ed, welcome to N1.
Thank you so much.
And of course, welcome to Sarajevo.
It's always good to be back. It's like the Hotel California. You know, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
You can never leave, and you keep coming back.
Part of me's been trying to leave ever since I first came here, and then the other half of me says, no, you will always feel at home in Sarajevo.
You probably drank water from Bashasha.
I left my heart here.
You did. You definitely did.
In Bosnia, I mean, in your country.
And you are so concentrated on Bosnia and everything that has happened in the 90s and after the 90s. And your analysis of Bosnian war, you said, does not linger on the horrors itself, especially, but it tries to actually explain it. Now, how would you then explain the Bosnian war and the horrors that happened in the 90s?
At one level, you cannot explain it. For reasons that I think Jasmina Zbanic gets very well in her film about Srebrenica. You know, that there was a macabre intimacy to this war. It wasn't really a war, to this genocide. Because the people who did it knew the people they were doing it to. They had played football together. They had been in school together. They were neighbors. And in the calamities of history and the appalling narratives of the British Empire, the French Empire, the Shoah, the perpetrators, generally speaking, did not know and had not grown up alongside the people they were mutilating, killing, raping, violating, beating. And there was a certain sort of macabre intimacy to what happened here that really defies explanation or
reason.
Or certainly reason. You know, unless one wants to go to such a dark corner of
Have you gone to the dark corner of the conclusion of Bosnia war? Have you been there? I mean, you've been through so much when it comes to Bosnia.
Yes, I
You
know.
met even with Radovan Karadzic, but when you say to the dark corners of trying to find a reason behind the reason, right? Have you been there? Have you been in that dark corner?
Yes and no, because the reason one becomes addicted to Bosnia and to my more recent work in Mexico is not because I'm a war junkie. I hate that word. I hate war. I'm not a war correspondent. I'm a peace correspondent. I'm an anti-war correspondent. And to be a good peace correspondent, unfortunately, you have to go to war.
You have to go to war.
And, you know, wherever, the darker the shadows fall, the brighter the colours. So you know, the worse it gets, so the resilience and the humour and the music and the spirit of you great people, that's what's addictive. It's what happens in spite of the dark, not because of it. And but I mean, yes, it's a hell of a question. Have I? Yes, I think I have touched it. Yes.
The dark corners. I've read it in some of your texts as well. You're trying to, and you are reaching to the dark corners of Bosnian war in the 90s.
Yes, and
what does it mean?
I think
for
I
you?
have looked into that abyss and that dark well that has no bottom to it. I mean, the day we walked through the gates by the canteen of Umarska, the concentration camp, death camp of Umarska. I mean, not everybody at the age of 39 gets to do this. And when we saw those men coming out of the hangar in various states of decay, marshaled into a canteen at machine gun point with their watery bean stew and bread. There's nothing like the eyes of a prisoner that can't speak. And when we see the guards, we actually saw very little that day. But we were in a place that should not exist, that no one should ever go.
Doesn't one feel helpless?
I now know what was happening in there. We walked past the rooms to their office, where the women were being violated all night, every night, by these beasts. We were in an infernal place. We saw very little, but knew that that which we had not seen was humankind at its worst. Evil is a difficult word. Take Shakespeare's Iago. He's evil. He's a genius. These people weren't evil in that way. They were, to use Hannah Arendt's term, the banality of evil. They were pathetic little people, awful
Savages.
little people, but whose brutality knew no end. When we were with the convoy of the deportees from Sanski Most over Mount Vlasic, and you saw the terror on these people's faces, and the fat, brutal, banal, stupid cruelty of the people marshalling them out into the no man's land, and the children running across the fields in Vitoflinsk and Levakov and going like this at the passing convoy, slitting them. What am I looking at? What is this? And, you know, I met Radovan Karadzic.
Tell me about that.
3 occasions.
Time, 1992.
Well, the first time was 1992. We went to Omarska on his authority for all sorts of complicated reasons that he knows more about than I do, because I don't know why he did it. But we did, and we met him. We had lunch with him in Bali.
Was this before?
And this was the day before we went.
Before you went?
Yeah.
So your perception of him was different than after you saw the atrocities. What was your perception of Radovan Karadzic?
That's a good question.
In 1992.
Was it different before? Well, you know
but you knowing, of course, his position and knowing what was going on, what was going to happen, but still haven't seen the extent of that brutality.
Well, exactly. You're right. Yes, and of course, over the next 3 awful, bloody years, during which our work, unfortunately, achieved absolutely nothing in terms of making Bosnia and what was happening here matter enough for what calls itself the international community to actually act sufficiently to do something to stop it, which we now know.
Can you just imagine 3 years to let something like that happen and
this
nothing going on?
This is an important thing. We'll just deal with Karadzic briefly, that meeting. I mean, he was going on and on about Serbia in the 14th century and blah-de-blah and the Ottoman Empire and everything. And I mean, if it wasn't so toxic and dangerous, it would be pathetic and almost absurd. I mean, he's a ridiculous figure. But the problem with his absurdity was that it was responsible for 100,000 lives and millions of homes destroyed and lives shattered and scattered around the world. But think of this, Ed,
that today, we'll go back to that moment, but today he's considered in many communities as a hero.
Yeah.
Even convicted, still considered a hero. What?
Exactly. But also, and I think despite those 3 years, I mean, you know, we discovered those camps in August 1992. Not every story you does get a reaction from the President of the United States, but ours did, ITN and myself, The Guardian. And you know, it was George Herbert Bush, the most powerful man in the world, said, this will stop. We will stop this. This cannot go on. We will do what is necessary. And they all joined in, John Major, Peter Carrington, David Owen, President Mitterrand. But actually, 1 day's drive from Venice, it carried on for 3 bloody years. Not because the world didn't know. It was in your face every night from Sarajevo, and we did the best we could to get to much harder places like the Drina Valley and parts of the Krajina, nothing happened. If anything, the so-called international community aided and abetted the violence, and as you say, then we have The Hague. Whether it achieved anything or not, I testified in, I think, 10 trials. I'm not sure it did achieve very much, actually, in retrospect, apart from make a lot of money for a lot of lawyers.
You did testify.
Yeah, I did. But you asked about Karadzic being a hero. I mean, it's mind-boggling. Look, genocide denial is as old as genocide. I mean, the British are as revolting in their view of the Irish famine as anybody else. My second home is the United States, which is built upon the genocide of the indigenous Americans. How many people really reckon with that? I mean, to some people, Custer is still a hero of the Western frontier, but he's not. He's the Karadzic of the United States of the 19th century, the United States. But the idea that this person can be sort of heralded as a hero is, it is like sort of you wound the survivors and the bereaved, and you insult the dead, and you spit on their graves by having done it in the first place. But to then sort of seek to kind of justify or glorify it is fairly astonishing. Look, it's 26 years now. It's 30 years since I first went into Vukovar, and 29 years since... Yes.
3 decades. And we're sitting here and we are talking about glorification.
And we're still talking about it. I mean, now, 26 years is quite a long time in modern society. 26 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, it was 1961 in Germany. The Beatles were playing in Hamburg, and the monuments and the museums in Germany are being built not by the Jews but by the Germans. They have looked at themselves in the mirror, they have come to terms with what they did, they have made all the right sort of moves towards what I call a reckoning with the Shoah. Now, we don't make analogies between what happened here and the Shoah, the Holocaust, but when I was looking for a language for this, I consulted the chairman of the Committee on Conscience at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, a man called Bergenthal, who had survived Auschwitz, the Death March, Sachsenhausen. He said, help me with, you tell me, what's the language to use? I said, well, how about echoes? Echoes loud and clear, he said. I thought, well, that's good enough. From him, that'll do. Here we have an echo of the Holocaust. And yet, nothing. Well, tiny bits. Jasmila talked wonderfully about her film creating what she called cracks in the wall when it is seen by young people in Republika Srpska and in Serbia. But the wall is still up. It's astonishing that they cannot just sort of begin to come to terms with what happened, acknowledge that, yes, but they say, atrocities were done on all sides. True, but the scale is another level. And it's also quite important who started it. They started it. It was their idea. 1 minute, Goran was a plumber and Damir was an electrician. And the next minute, Goran the plumber is mutilating Damir, the electrician, and raping his sister, Amira.
Wife and mother and children.
I mean, they know what happened.
You said one word well, the banality of everything.
Yeah, it is.
So how do you explain, not the horrors, but the banality of it? You can't. You can't.
Because I think, Hannah Arendt was right. She was covering the trial of Eichmann in Jerusalem for the murder of millions of people. And she realized that this was a sort of miserable little man, really. I tried to invoke Iago in Othello. And Iago is the devil, is an intelligent creature. These people are not. Jasmila was asked by people, why did she not make Mladic more cruel and brutal in her film? And she said, because he's a man. He's a rather ridiculous man. What is so toxic and poisonous is what these people can do when they have a mad ideology, when they construct a great kind of phantom enemy that isn't really there. On a completely different scale and in a different language, this goes on and on and on. I mean, look at Brexit. This phantom of sort of foreign Europe, intellectuals, cosmopolitans, I mean, all this began in Bosnia, this enemy that isn't there. I mean, Damir the electrician was not Goran the plumber's enemy. They come from the same village. They were friends. They played in the same football team.
But the ideology, look what what it did of let's take Damir now in consideration as an example. It made him that enemy.
Yeah, well, exactly.
But 26 years later,
yeah,
they still believe Damir was an enemy, and that was all right. What happened?
That's the bit I don't understand. You know, are they crazy or are they just pretending to be crazy? I mean, you know perfectly well what happened in Umarska and at Srebrenica and all the other places that we don't talk enough about. You know, and Vlasenica, and Visegrad, and Foča, and Rogatica, and Kotovaroš, and how long have we got? You know, and I think one of the things that sort of still baffles me and why I'm really not answering your questions, because I'm not trying to be like a politician and evade your questions.
I know, I understand it. I feel that.
But it's what does sort of, you know, what keeps me awake at night. It's not just what happened, but this. Why didn't it matter enough for action to be taken to do something about it? Why doesn't it matter enough for people like Noam Chomsky and various people in Britain who were given jobs, who say the camps were fabricated? But they're still revered. The people who say that in England are given a column in the Times, a man called McHugh. Claire Fox has a programme on the BBC called The Moral Maze about how to resolve moral issues. Peter Handke, now he's one of these people who can't make up his mind whether he justifies or denies the Srebrenica massacre. You know, it didn't happen, but it had to be done, but it didn't happen, but it had to be done. Well, for a start, Mr. Handke, make up your effing mind. But also, you know, I think that if Peter Handke had said George Floyd was black, so the police were right to kill him, I think there'd be a problem. I think if Peter Handke
but when he said something like this,
Srebrenica, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Olga Tokarczuk, the Polish writer,
yes,
she calls herself a liberal, a radical, a feminist, enlightened kind of person, and she has an opportunity to say in 5 words more for Bosnia than all the words we wrote for 3 years. She could say, and the mothers of Srebrenica are outside the Nobel Prize, desperate, outraged, outside the ceremony, demonstrating. She could just say, I dedicate my prize to the mothers of Srebrenica, or I'd rather take my prize tomorrow, if possible, not with this man. No, it's she's got
Spotlight.
Her arm in arm. Yeah, I mean, why doesn't it matter? I don't know the answer.
Such a good
Sorry,
question.
I'm supposed to be.
No. You're right.
Your
this is
and I'm asking you. I'm asking questions to your good viewers.
You're actually answering more than I'm asking, and I'm very grateful for that.
Why does the Nobel Prize people? Why does the sort of Polish liberal feminist? Why doesn't it matter? If it was George Floyd, if it was, you know, if she'd said, you know, if Peter Handke believed that there was a Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy and that they had to be annihilated to save the Aryan race, there would be a problem, a big problem.
Absolutely.
But with Srebrenica, with Bosnia, it doesn't matter.
And I do have a feeling
that he gave the eulogy at Milosevic's funeral.
I do have a feeling that even when we speak about Srebrenica, you have reactions like, oh, again this.
Again.
Yes, again and again.
And every person who lost a husband, a son, a brother in that atrocity has the right to talk about it for the rest of their lives and
in our lives. Exactly, and our children's lives.
Not to take anything from them, so does everybody.
Do you know that there are more than 570?
Exactly.
Exactly. Do you know that there are more than 570 mothers that already died that didn't have a chance to bury at least one little bone of their children?
It's an outrage after 26 years.
So it's up to us to continue to talk about that in
for
their
your
name.
generation, in their name. I couldn't agree more. I mean, for months after the Srebrenica massacre, the byways of eastern Bosnia were heaving with trucks, moving bodies and body parts from one place to the next.
In our mass graves, and we're still searching for
secondary, tertiary.
Exactly.
So the families 26 years later have to go through the agony. You know, well, we've got your emir's rib cage, fibula, tibula, and a bit of his skull in the ground. Now we've found a shoulder blade and a pelvic bone. What do you want us to do with this? I mean, after 26 years, people are having to make those decisions while the Nobel Committee gives a prize to a man who, well, he either thinks it was a good idea to kill those 8,000 people or he thinks it didn't happen. It doesn't really matter which.
Do you know what's interesting? That I always think about what keeps me up at night as well. The mothers of Srebrenica have forgiven the perpetrator. They said, we will never forget, we suffer, we'll suffer until we die. We can't wait to die so we can go see our children. And even with that fact, the other side is still denying that what happened was genocide. You are forgiven. Take that as a gift and move on. Do something good in your lifetime. And it's not happening.
No.
How come that the victim here is behaving the way they're not even outraged anymore? And they should, right?
I agree.
And it's other way around.
Exactly.
Now the perpetrator and those who believe in those ideologies are outraged because we talk about it. And the mothers of Srebrenica and people that actually went through that, they have forgiven them. What paradox is that? What else should be done for everybody just to say, okay, like the Germans after World War II, we have to look at each other, we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and start building better ways for our children.
Well, I mean, one hopes.
That keeps me up at night.
That there would be a generational shift. I mean,
I have to be honest with you, Ed. Children nowadays are very radicalized when it comes to that.
Still.
Very, very. And I'm afraid that it will take 4 or 5 or maybe 6 generations until that is gone. We as journalists, we have to deal with that every day. And I'm very repulsed that children, 16, 17, 18, are very, very radicalized and believe that what happened 26 years ago, even before they were born, was actually the right thing. What do we do? I mean, where do we start? How do we have to keep the memory going. We have to keep the history and the facts going and mention it and talk about it so it doesn't happen to them. But it seems like they are too off their path to the future, to the way where we can actually really, really live together.
Yes, and that's why, you know, my book is entitled "The War is Dead, Long Live the War." It's a pastiche on what happens to a monarch when they die. I mean, you know, absence of war is not peace. You know, peace is tough. Peace is a state of mind. Peace is a philosophical idea. Peace does not just mean that people aren't shooting each other anymore, or that we can sit in this garden without being afraid of being killed by shrapnel in 5 minutes' time. If you don't do what you've described, if you don't reckon with, if you don't have that generational shift. I mean, in the 1960s in Germany, it was basically, what did you do in the war, Daddy? And the youth demanded an answer, and they got it. And Willy Brandt made the speech, and
so
now
different.
we have.
It's
a different concept, different culture. You know, it's not just Bosnia. You know, I'm half Irish, and I mean, the calculated starvation of 1 million people in the mid-19th century has not really been reckoned with or acknowledged. There are the beginnings of a reckoning with the genocide of the Native Americans in California. There is now, for the first time at state level, there is a commission, a Truth and Healing Commission. Unfortunately, it was interrupted by COVID. The recent news from Canada shows that indigenous children were being abducted, kidnapped, killed, put in mass graves, sometimes used for medical experiments, but not just in the 19th century. I mean, the latest are in 1996. I mean, this is a year after Srebrenica. So, you know, it isn't just Bosnia. I mean, one can say to these dear people who will be at Potocari on Sunday, you know, you may feel alone, but you're not actually.
That's a nice.
you know, I think
message.
you know, there are people in New Mexico and Arizona and California, and there are people in Guatemala and El Salvador, and there are people in Ireland, and there are people in the Congo, you know, who are in the same limbo as you. They are stuck in the same place, the same unbearable sort of waiting for Godot, this Samuel Beckett sort of, you know, the day is over but the night has not begun place. It's a pity they can't sort of all just sort of talk to each other.
It's a pity they can't talk to each other.
We are talking about
alone.
Bosnia.
They're not alone. And they have us, right? They have journalists. They have people like you.
Genocide denial is as old as genocide.
It's as old as genocide.
You know, you try talking to the Turks about Armenia.
Yes.
I mean, you know, it doesn't matter. What colour your skin, what the odious motives of the perpetrators was. What matters is who you lost, and what matters is reckoning with why you lost them, and an apology that you lost them, and compensation, and some kind of reparation
you can
is the first step.
It's the first step and the least you can do.
Yeah, and
but it's a good message. I like the message. You're not alone. They're with you. There are so many, and such a pity they can't talk to each other, to share their pain. The world is in one hand it's a beautiful place, right? And on the other hand it's just a violent and banal place.
Well, exactly, and I think the reason why, you know, if we end, you know, in a sort of major key, if you like, if this was music, I mean, the resilience of your people is why one keeps coming back, really. It's partly rage and trauma and everything, but you know, it's also because you know, you here in Sarajevo, you had concerts of chamber music in the National Theatre during the siege. I've written a book about music and war, and I decided to write it when the Sarajevo String Quartet, actually as a trio that day. There was a moment I'll never forget when the viola, a shell landed so close to the theatre that his stand fell over, and what did we do? And he picked up his stand, he replaced the score, and the lead violinist, Shabaganic, I think he was called, just says, "Chetri desidere." They played on. It's like sort of, we're trying to play Haydn. Could you just shut up for half an hour? You know, and then
that resilience,
and there was
spirit.
The Rock Under the Siege, there was the Sikta, there was the Shoba Seric's band. I mean, you know, there is a way.
So you've been there. You've seen that.
Yeah, I love all that. I mean,
you will be coming back to Bosnia.
Well,
right?
yes, I will.
You know, you are very welcome,
not.
right? This is your second home. I'm hoping.
It is.
You say United States is your second home, but I'd like to say UK, Bosnia, and then United States.
Well, no, the UK. Well, I'm an exile in the UK. Any cosmopolitan in Britain now is an exile in their own country. I mean,
the politics.
Well, it's interesting why they hate us so much. They hate us because we are the cosmopolite. This is the word that sort of both Hitler and Stalin used for the Jews, and I think there was something about that in Bosnia that certainly in the Krajina, which is the place I know better than the others, there was an intelligentsia, and of course this did include Serbs and Croats, but the Bosnians who were the most travelled, who had been to Istanbul, they'd been to Cairo,
Italy, Rome.
Yes, Germany, and you know, Austria. There was a sort of cosmopolitanism, and I think fascism of the kind that happened here, and certainly the kind that brought about the Holocaust and the Shoah of the Jews, was a hatred of cosmopolitanism, a hatred of curiosity in other cultures, a hatred
the knowledge
of just, you know, just broadening your horizons and looking over the mountain at the next mountain, and then looking over that mountain. And I think
How small do you have
they
to be?
couldn't take it, and in a way, so much of what we've seen since in Russia and in Britain and in other parts of Europe, Hungary, Czech Republic, America, until November, when thank God they did the right thing.
They did the right thing.
Started here. This antipathy towards the other, rather than the curiosity towards the other, the embrace of the other, I love listening to Damir Imamovic and Amira Medunjanin, because what they do is they take music from all over the region. They
make it contemporary.
Amira has a Serbian pianist, a Croatian guitarist. She sings songs from Macedonia in Serbia, and songs from Croatia in Macedonia, and she mocks this
ideology,
misery with music. And Damir does the same.
Way?
I mean, Damir takes Sevda into his, my lifetime, and long after my lifetime into his.
It's interesting that you like Sevda. Very interesting.
And it comes from all over. It comes from the Arab world. It comes from. It has all sorts of rhythms from everywhere.
Tonalities. You can feel it.
Yeah,
you can see
absolutely.
It's
well,
right there.
it's the blues of the region. Just as the blues and jazz is a form of music that kind of combines the slave culture of the Americas with West Africa. So Sevda and Amira, the way Amira kind of jazzifies Sevda, which some people like and some don't. I mean, I think this is probably where, if there is any hope, it will come from this kind of thing.
Of course, we will see you back again in Bosnia.
Oh, there's no question of that. No, I know.
This year's commemoration, 26th commemoration of Srebrenica genocide, is for you, I see, very personal. Since you've been here, you feel it, like you said. I feel the pain, the horrors. I cannot understand why somebody would have that imaginary enemy, like you said right now. And what do you think the lessons we should all take away from Srebrenica this year, after all the verdicts that we've had, Stanišić, Simatović, Mladić, and the convictions we finally have and that we sought, right? What messages should we take from Srebrenica this year then? 19 people, the remains of 19 victims of genocide will be buried this year. The youngest one's 16 years, Asmir Osmanović. He was a child that tried to flee the horrors and was executed.
In the woods on the road of death?
Yes. I receive a lot of messages on social media and comments. And one comment stayed with me, and it really, another thing that keeps me awake, asking, but how many Serbs did Asmir kill that he got killed?
Not the child.
Yes.
No.
And, when you talk about reconciliation, when you talk about living together, when you talk about all of that, and then you have people thinking, hey, but he deserved what he got. How do you explain that to somebody? How do you, not to answer anything or not. I always feel like silence is approval, but on the other hand, you don't just answer to everybody. What messages should we take? What can we do better in order to preserve?
Well, I think
Srebrenica.
As you can probably tell, I'm not a very optimistic person.
I am not either.
But I'd like,
but
one always feels that one should sort of end a bit like a symphony. One should end with a coda. I think, on the one hand, learn the lesson. Those of my generation, that you will probably depart from this garden into the next, well, whatever or wherever that is, without what you are owed. you know, without what history owes you and what the perpetrators of this owe you. Hoping that your children will leave the, you know, go into the next garden differently. But even if that doesn't happen, know you are right. Know that your gods, goddesses, or God is on your side. And if you have no God, then the universe, the morality of Mother Nature is on your side. That whether these people are crazy or pretending to be crazy, whether they like what they did or don't like what they did but pretend they do, or whatever is happening in the fetid sewer of their souls, the stinking, rotting sewer of their being. They are wrong. You are right. And you have right on your side, and you have truth on your side. And
that's the best weapon.
That, I think, would be, in that dark moment. I also feel so much for people that disappeared. I've been working a lot in Mexico, and on the 80,000 disappeared there. And until recently, I haven't been back to Prijedor for a few years, but there was a lady who still closed up for the summer, but left the back door open and food in the larder, just in case. Those people who are left in that limbo, you are right. You are right. Whatever, you have truth on your side. And you can live with yourself. You can stare at your soul, and you know you're at peace with your soul and with the soul of your sisters and your brothers and the others here and out there in history, in the Americas, in Armenia, in Ireland, in all the places in Africa where the same things were done. You will meet them on the other side.
The right side of history.
You will meet them on the other side.
Meet them on the other side. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for sparing time to talk to us.
No, it's my honor to work.
Thank you so much. Thank you.